Mark.
All right, so we are live. This is Trans Options here with Lindy Engineering for our hydrogen fuel cell model car race challenge. And we are here to ask some questions of our engineer volunteers. So first of all, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Kristen Tomasicchio, Environmental Education Coordinator here at Trans Options. And I've compiled a list of frequently asked questions of our high school students participating this year. And I will send them off to our volunteer engineers. So if you guys wouldn't mind introducing yourselves and talking a little bit about how you got involved in our competition, please.
No problem. I'm Gary Spingarn. This is my second year with the company, Lindy LLC. I started in our metals group that dealt with oxygen applications, a lot of thermo and combustion. Corporate communications came to me one day, and they came to the rest of our group asking about, hey, are you guys into alternative energy? We have this outreach program in Providence High School right on the corner. I've been on projects like these all throughout college. I was involved in the Kimmy Car competition, which is pretty much the same rubric, same kind of setup, except it's on a regional and a national level. And I had a bunch of experience, so I thought, shot.
We are live. This is Trans Options here with Lindy.
And then I'm Brent Schultz. I'm also a second year here with Lindy. Previously, I was in our manufacturing group as well as our hydrogen fueling. And currently, I am responsible for the Shell Eco Marathon, which is an event we do with Shell, the oil company, in which they sponsor student groups to produce cars that are big enough for an individual to ride in, and they try to drive around a racetrack using alternative energies, hydrogen, methane, ethanol, LNG, and so we are the hydrogen supplier for that event, and I'm responsible for managing that event, which will be taking place in Detroit this year. And so that's kind of my background within the hydrogen area. Matt.
My name is Matt Isagna, and I don't have any of the experiences they have. I did something like this in high school. It was fun, so I figured if I was able to get on the other side of it instead of being on the judging or on the competitive side, get into the judging side, I'll see what I can do. So, welcome.
And I'm Matt Hershkowitz. I'm an application engineer for the industrial applications group that Brent actually used to work in, and Gary is now in. My experience as far as these goes, and specifically with hydrogen, more with automobiles, I've been involved in Formula SAE in college, as well as I've actually worked for one of the big four auto manufacturers as an intern too. So I've been around cars and propulsion and everything like that, engines for a little while.
So sounds like we have a lot of experience in the room. So if you guys wouldn't mind just tackling the questions I G-chatted to you one by one. Doesn't really matter where we start on the list. If you have any particular ones that you wanted to kick it off with, they're just in a random order.
Okay. All right, yeah, we'll just go down the list. I'll just read the question, and then I guess we'll discuss. Okay, question 1. My fuel cell runs the car for half of the length of the track, but doesn't manage to get the car to the finish line. What do I need to do to fix? What do I need to fix to increase the distance that my car travels? Okay. All right. Well, there could be a number of problems. You have to take a look at your car, see what's going on as it's going down the track. Are your wheels slipping? Are you getting the friction? Do you need to check your gear ratio? You might need to do that as well. You got to make sure all your connections are all right. You got to make sure the electrolysis is working. You're not all these proton exchange things. So, this is it's a test model for a fuel cell. Normally, the bigger models this is a 1 or a 2 stack. Typically, you'll have 10, 20. That goes. I mean, some stacks they don't all come out the same. They degrade. And you might need to switch it out, but I would say first start with your car, really look at what's going on as it's going down the track, make sure you have your wheels oriented the same way, make sure you're not slipping. If you just stay at it, you should find the problem.
Yeah, I would focus maybe on friction. I mean, are your wheels spinning more than they should? Are they getting the power they're creating actually down on the track? Again, gear ratio, make sure maybe you should be changing your gears around, go for a larger or smaller. And then I don't know if they can leak test, but maybe you have a leak somewhere, so some soapy water on some connections, and if you see some bubbles coming up, that means you have a leak. These are pretty low pressure, so I don't think a leak would necessarily be that big of an issue, or you guys probably won't have that issue. That's something you could be looking at.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Okay, so
All
that's
right.
it. So far we haven't had any responses, so let's just keep at them.
All right. Next question. Is there a way we can create the hydrogen and then store it so we have a backup, so we have backup containers for race day using the supply tubing or balloons or syringes? We have tried, but the hydrogen seems to escape. Not surprised.
So you're going to have that issue with hydrogen. It is the smallest molecule you're going to get. We've been having that issues. I mean, it's been an issue for a long time. The only way to really store it is in a cylinder or some kind of rigid container. Safety-wise, you're going to have to kind of weigh the pros and cons. Is it worth storing hydrogen? It is a flammable gas, so do you really want to be storing that? You got to make sure it's safe if you are storing it. But in terms of collecting it from and then sending it into the fuel cell,
That's tough. I mean, the way one of the cars I worked with set up, we had a balloon that went over, this little tube, and fit over this. But the way this is set up, you need to use the tubing. I can't think of a viable solution off the top of my head that would work. On top of that, I don't know if that violates the competition rules. I really don't know. I thought you had to make the hydrogen on site using the electrolysis. So I would check on that. But given the equipment you have to use, I don't know. You can surely explore it, and if it's within the rules, go ahead. But I can't think of something off the top of my head where you can store the hydrogen safely.
I mean, yeah, if you're going to do electrolysis and collect the hydrogen in a balloon, that's not that difficult to do. It's just getting it into the fuel cell with the connections given. I mean, there's different kind of tubes you can use. You have to get the hydrogen to go and flow through the fuel cell. So there's lots of little issues that would need to be worked out in order for you to store it. I would assume the best way to do it is just, I probably wouldn't do it. I mean, storing the hydrogen, it's easier, just to send the water and let the electrolysis happen.
Yeah, just try and make the electrolysis do the work. That's what I would say.
It is in the rules that they have to produce the hydrogen on site that day. But this was an interesting question, so I figured I'd throw it in anyway.
Was it on site that day? Like, can they bring a test tube and some water and do electrolysis at the event, like the hour before?
Right, which is exactly what I think that they were trying to do a workaround on. If they can figure it out, power to them, but we'll see.
I mean, I remember we did that with electrolysis, and we would essentially put a battery and send the current through water, and we would separate the water, and we would separate it using a graduated cylinder, and get the hydrogen out. Then you need to find a way to get it into the balloon. So if you do that, probably with a syringe and a plunger. I mean, you guys have the syringes, so if you wanted to stick a tube up into a graduated cylinder where you've been collecting hydrogen from electrolysis, you essentially would have a syringe of hydrogen. You could go that route, and since you're already using a syringe for your water, I guess you could use that for your hydrogen. But I don't know if that's a way you guys want to go about doing it.
Just a second here.
Alright, so
Yeah.
alright, so the next question is there an
Is there an advantage to having the motor in the back versus the front? And so, yes, because it's a rear-wheel drive vehicle, you want the weight down where the driving force would be coming from. And since they're, well, assuming you have a rear-wheel drive vehicle, you want the weight to be where the power is being put down. So you do want pretty much most of the weight, as much weight as you can, while still kind of keeping it balanced. You want to get as much weight as you can towards the back wheels. So that would be a reason to have your motor towards the back.
Also, depending on the length that your torque is traveling, you'll have more losses than you would if it was traveling a shorter distance. So as far as efficiency on how much power is being created versus how much is getting to the actual road and propelling the car, the shorter distance you have and the less you have in between, the more efficient you'll be.
there's no other comments, we can move on to the next question. Our car is, I like this one. Our car is pulling to the left. What do we need to fix? This happens all the time. One solution that we employed with our car, we tried 3 wheels. That didn't work out so well. And we went with 4 wheels, and what we found is if we keep the wheels in the back larger than the wheels in the front, that typically solves the problem. That's something you can certainly try. And again, check your wheels, see if one of them's spinning. Make sure your axle is
Balance the
Balance
wheel,
out,
balance
yeah.
it.
You should
Just balance
also-
the car.
Yeah, also make sure that both sides of the car are the same weight. If you have a heavier side, it's going to naturally turn that way. So check to see if your left side is heavier than your right side.
And see if there's any additional friction. So if your wheels are spinning around an axle and there's more friction on one side versus the other, then you'll pull to that one side.
I would say it's probably a balance issue. So if you just
Yeah.
balance your car, you probably will have better.
That's the thing. Like since we employed 4 wheels, we were able to work out the balance easier.
I mean, this is assuming your wheels don't have a natural favor to one direction. So, I mean, that's probably the first thing to check is if your wheels
Also,
are
your
not
alignment.
going- Yeah, your alignment. Make sure that your alignment is correct.
You have to take your real car in for alignment pretty often, so you should probably the same with your miniature car.
So what's the best way to ensure proper alignment when they're in the construction phases?
If you have a, what was the 90-degree?
Protractor?
If you have a
Yeah.
protractor, you can make sure that your wheels are 90 degrees to your axle. That's the easiest way to, because your axle's going to be,
Be the position of, or
is
the position. So,
So compare your axle to your wheels and then your axle to the body frame of the actual car. If you can do that, then you should be great. That should work out nicely.
Yeah.
And you want all 4 to do that. One wheel going straight in the other 3, or even 3 wheels going straight and one wheel going differently is going to affect your car.
Now, speaking of 3 and 4 wheels, I've seen students do both 1 wheel in the front, 2 in the back, and then 2 in front, 2 in back. Is there an advantage to having 3 wheels versus 4?
It really all comes down to how your car works, and then it comes down what's the shape of the chassis you have. How's your motor oriented? Now, I'm inclined to say that there's trade-offs, but then it passes on to other factors.
I mean, there's stability. If you have 4 wheels, you're more stable. If you have 3 wheels, you have less friction. You want to be stable, but you want to have the least amount of friction as possible, so you need to weigh those balances. I would say for this event, are they turning?
They have a wire assist that keeps them straight. No, it's just straight.
So it's just straight.
away.
I would assume 3 wheels would be better because stability isn't necessarily an issue because you're not turning around corners. So less friction, the better is what my recommendation would be. Now, you guys might find something completely different, but I would assume a 3-wheel configuration, less friction. You don't really need the stability. It's less weight. I see more advantages to 3 wheels for a straight kind of drag race.
But on the other side of that, you have to make sure that your alignment is perfect. Otherwise, you're going to be pulling to one side, and the wire that's pulling you straight is going to create more friction than you save from the wheel.
And that's the stability. You're giving up stability by going 3 wheels.
So those are all things.
There's
to
less
look into.
tolerance for error if you have 3 wheels.
Interesting. So let's move on ahead.
All right. What is the best way to secure the motor to the chassis? We are using a plastic chassis.
Epoxy? You can
Yeah,
epoxy it?
epoxy, Gorilla Glue. Yeah.
An adhesive? Is that
Yeah,
from
there's also
probably the 3M.
the kit we got. We have an adhesive pad. This seems pretty secure.
Yeah, it's a little adhesive pad. You have the little AC motor or DC motor, and it came with a little 3M clip that looks like I don't even know what it looks like. It looks like a pipe holder, and it just slides right in the motor, and it's a little 3M adhesive, and you just peel that off and stick it to the jack.
But yeah, epoxy, Gorilla Glue. I don't see this as a huge issue.
Just make sure that the adhesive that you're using can be used on plastic. That's the one thing you need to check the label for. If it says a wood glue, it's probably not going to work.
Hot glue might not work, but it might. And you want to make sure the engine is stable and not moving anywhere, because if you're driving around and you're getting vibrations and the motor's kind of wiggling a little bit, you're going to get some turning issues and some stability issues.
You could also just strap it down if you are so inclined.
Yeah.
Was it ties or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, guys. I mean, anything should work
Ties or
really.
hands, or how exactly?
I would imagine something with a little more friction, because this is creating a good amount of torque. I mean, it is a motor, so when it spins, it's naturally, if it's not held down, the motor itself will also want to spin because of Newton's laws. So I would assume rubber bands would be better than zip ties. I think if you put zip ties around it, there's not a lot of friction to plastic zip ties, and so I would imagine the motor might spin a little bit within the zip tie. And so you probably want something with a little more friction that will prevent that torque from actually twisting your motor. And so you're sending the power to where you want it as opposed to just spinning your motor around. Yeah.
All right. I guess we'll move on. All right. Again, what design strategy is best for the short length type of, for the short race? And we're talking about, making sure you have your weight on the back, orienting your motor like so, making sure you're balancing stability and weight, and friction. Watch your car when you test it. When I did my project, it was 80% testing, 90% test. So I would say worry less about the design and worry more about practice and refining.
And just go on the internet and see what normal drag racers look like. I mean, you see the funny cars that are racing that do the wheelies. I would assume a small, kind of low profile, low to the ground. You want to be as low as possible without dragging the belly of the car. Just go on the internet and see what dragsters look like. I mean, some cars are faster than others, and they're going off of the same engines, and it's usually because of how they are designed. And so kind of go on the internet, find a dragster, and those are usually companies that put a lot of money into figuring out how cars can be more efficient. So let someone else do work for you and design your car by going on the internet, finding a fast dragster, and that's already been put through a wind tunnel. They've already done stuff to it. They've already done all the research. And so you can find a design that someone else has done, a funny car or some kind of car like that, and just kind of model it off of that. Those principles that they're using should be principles that you guys are using as well. I wouldn't drag race an H2 Hummer. I would drag race a Corvette. And so just kind of go off of those principles. Just go off the internet, find something that's fast, and the research has already been done for you guys.
But at the same time, don't just use that design. Try and see if you can make little modifications to make it better for your specific race.
Yeah.
It's all based on your specific vehicle. That's why it's trial and error is the best option.
Yeah, if you're going 3 wheels, you're not going to base your car off of a Corvette because a Corvette doesn't have 3 wheels. So you're going to have to design around that a little bit, and there should be some benefits you can get, and you'll have to play around. But kind of just get some ideas from what's already been done, what people have already figured out.
That's an excellent suggestion because they're required to keep a progress journal. So that should be actually one of the entries you make. This is directed directly at the students. Do that research, look up a dragster that you find particularly interesting, and write down a list of pros and cons of things that you could apply or things that you would change as the engineer. Just my suggestion. All right, let's move on to the next question.
Sure, I like this one. Are these fuel cells we're using like the ones being used in actual fuel cell cars? Yes and no. that's the best way. The principle is the same. You have hydrogen, you pull it apart, or it's protons and electron flow gives you your energy. I mean,
Usually, yeah, I mean, what's in a car is usually just more of these and larger forms of these. I mean, these are what they're using. They might have some cooling systems on them to make them more efficient, and some water removal systems to help some of the chemical reaction, stoichiometry. But for the most part, you're sending hydrogen across these anodes and cathodes, and you're just separating the hydrogen electrons and protons and creating water. And so, yeah, these are what they're using, just on a larger scale.
It also requires a catalyst. I mean, there's a lot of extensive.
A lot of catalysts, yeah.
A lot of catalysts. Popular ones are platinum, but there are more experimental ones, and that's a very, very big thing when you're scaling up. Platinum it works, but it degrades quick, and it's very, very expensive. Makes it less viable. So again, the principle is the same, but it's
just a bigger scale, and
it's a lot more elegant.
Yeah.
To get to a car.
Interesting. What materials usually go into building the industrial-sized hydrogen fuel cell stacks?
I know that some typical catalysts are like nickel, cobalt catalysts. Those are
Rubidium and
Palladium's
palladium. I mean, they use all the chemical elements that you learn on the periodic table that you never talk about ever. Molybdenum, tungsten. I mean, yeah, you look at some of these catalyst formulas, and it's 6 elements long, and it's a huge chain of things you don't even remember from the periodic table. They're just pulling some of the most random ones from the bottom left-hand corner they can find. A lot of salts, a lot of transition metals. I mean, they kind of run the gamut. They're trying to find the cheapest catalyst they can, naming all these chemicals and all those elements. Those are all really expensive, and so they're actively trying to find ones that are using some of the cheaper elements, the aluminums and the nickels, and they're trying to find catalysts that are doing that, or that are using those. But right now they're kind of stuck with platinum, palladium, gold, silver. I mean, they're stuck using the precious metals right now.
So in real world, are these very expensive then if they're using those precious metals?
Yep. If you guys are familiar with catalytic converters in your car, that's one of the most expensive things you can fix, and that's just because they're chock full of these precious metals, these precious catalysts. They have palladium in them, they have rubidium, they have all kinds of things in them, and so these catalysts are very expensive. They're precious metals, and they don't have an alternative yet. So yeah, these fuel cells in these cars, I mean, if you're comparing an A-B car, and A is gasoline and B is a hydrogen fuel cell car, you can assume about another $15,000 to $20,000 for the car just because it has some fuel cells in it. So.
Shall we move on?
How do we get hydrogen?
Oh yes. How do we get hydrogen to fuel cars on the big scale? Or do you want to handle that one?
So, I mean, there's 2 ways to do it. You guys are doing one of them, electrolysis, but that's a very energy intensive, not very industry friendly because it costs a lot of energy and you just get some hydrogen. And so we put more energy in than we get out. What we do is something called steam methane reform. And essentially you're taking methane gas, which is just a natural gas we get out of the ground. It's the main component of natural gas. And we separate it in a chemical process called steam methane reform. And using steam, boiling water, we're able to take out the hydrogens that is in methane. And methane is CH4. So we're taking away those 4 hydrogens, kind of throwing away the carbon. Turns into CO2 and carbon monoxide. But we're able to collect that hydrogen. And that's a more energy-friendly process for an industrial gas company like Linde. And so that's how we get our hydrogen. And then depending on what the end use is, we will liquefy it through various compression steps and cooling steps to get it into liquid hydrogen form. And then we're able to transport it around the country and send it to the gas stations and the fueling stations that are using these. We usually store it as a liquid because it's easier to transport a gas as a liquid because we can send more of it on a truck. And so we prefer to do it that way. And then once we're at the gas station, we'll actually turn it into a vapor. So we'll take the liquid hydrogen, we'll vaporize it, we'll pump it first so that it's at a high pressure so that we can send it into the cars. And when we put it in the cars for refueling, it's usually at a couple thousand PSI in a steel or aluminum tank in the car so that they have enough hydrogen to go a certain distance across the road. So that's how we make hydrogen and kind of distribute it around the country.
What do you do with that CO2 that's produced as a result of getting that hydrogen? Is it captured and then dealt with in another way, or what happens?
So, yeah, usually, I mean, Linde, we distribute and, I don't want to say manufacture, we collect CO2 and we harness it and we refine it. And so, yeah, we collect the CO2, we clean it to make sure that it doesn't have methane in it, it doesn't have oxygen in it, to make sure that it's pure CO2, and then we sell that to the Coke and Pepsi's that need CO2. So Linde takes any opportunity we can to collect the CO2 since that's a product for us. And so whenever we're making CO2, we are usually purifying it, liquefying it, cleaning it, and selling it. It's a free product to us. We're making it just by making the hydrogen, so we might as well clean it and store it and sell it. So yeah, we collect the CO2 that we produce.
So interesting. Okay, my last question revolving around this is, how big are the average size tanks if you were making this for a vehicle like a sedan or an SUV in the in today's market?
So in the car, same size as your gas tank. I mean, the cylinders that we put on a vehicle, usually it's like a pack of like 2 of them tied together with a valve. Anywhere between 4 to 6 liters, up to 10 liter. I got probably 4 to 10 liters is what the volume, that's a water volume, that the cylinders would be in a car for a hydrogen vehicle. So that's about 6 gallons. Yeah, but that's high pressure. So you're putting that in at thousands of psi. Is how much hydrogen we're putting into these tanks. So these are super high pressure tanks that are about 6 to 10 liters of water is the volume. So they're not that big. They're about the size of your car gas tank.
Interesting. Okay, so let's head on to the next question.
Sure. Another big picture one. Are there downsides to using hydrogen fuel cells for transportation? Well, we kind of discussed one of them, getting the fuel, getting the juice. Still a young industry, but we are looking for other solutions besides electrolysis. Again, their electrolysis is getting better with their solar-powered electrolysis. Now that we're achieving higher efficiency, that's starting to become viable. We still have natural gas steaming. We're working on getting the juice, but then comes the infrastructure. The infrastructure also needs to be in place, so that's all the fueling stations. Because there's a gas station every 10 miles, but the same is going to have to be for nitrogen. Hydrogen. How are we going to achieve that? But downsides are there really any downsides like power?
There's a large social stigma against it. Ever since the Hindenburg exploded, not great. It's the same gases, same issues. So the safety regulations on the cars have to be much stronger, because if you have a car accident, obviously you've got a lot of friction, a possibility of a spark. You need to make sure that high pressure hydrogen, which is flammable and at that concentration is explosive, is not it's protected and safe, so that you don't have a fender bender and have both cars explode.
But
that would be not ideal.
Even in terms of flammability, though, I mean, gasoline is flammable. And there's actually videos on the internet you can see of cars that have gas on fire versus cars that are hydrogen that are on fire. One of the issues with hydrogen is when it's on fire, you can't see it. It's an invisible flame. So that's probably one of the main safety cons against hydrogen I see. Because when we say it's flammable, well, gasoline's flammable too. But hydrogen burns so much quicker. So if you have a car that catches on fire that has hydrogen, it's there and gone, and the fires. Hydrogen's so light, it kind of floats up in the air, and it stays very neatly. The flame stays very neat with how it is. It doesn't spread out. It kind of stays where the hydrogen is because it's floating up so quickly. So it's safer in that aspect. There are videos on the internet you can see of these 2 cars caught on fire. One's hydrogen and one's gasoline. And the hydrogen car is done being on fire in 15 seconds, and you really didn't see anything. The car didn't keep smoldering, and it didn't stay on fire. And you look at the car that had gasoline in it, and it's a slow burn, and it took 30 minutes for the car to be kind of use up all the fuel that was on it. So yes, it's flammable. Is it any more dangerous than gasoline? Not necessarily. It just has that stigma because of some incidences that the industries have had with hydrogen.
And we got to touch on the biggest one of all, cost. Money, 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 right? I mean, these cars are very expensive for going over the catalyst and getting the fuel. But, this is how, innovation works. There's turnover, there's more money going in the funding produces better results, and we can work on getting cheaper cars. So, in my opinion, that's what I think is the biggest hurdle right now. Controlling these costs. Because people are going to want to buy a cheaper car. I'm not going to spend, $60, $70, $80, $100,000.
Yeah, and right now, as a company, we're having kind of a chicken or the egg issue. Do we build hydrogen fueling stations in hopes that the car companies will build hydrogen cars? or do the car companies build hydrogen cars in hopes that someday companies like us will build hydrogen fueling stations? And nobody wants to take that initial investment that needs to be taken to get into the hydrogen field. And so we've worked with several car companies to kind of guarantee that we will build stations if they build cars, but that's still kind of a slow process. And, we are businesses, we're here to make money, so there needs to be a business case for us to build these facilities, and without the car companies building hydrogen cars, people won't be building hydrogen stations, so that's an issue.
So then why has California become such a model state for hydrogen fueling stations?
I would say the main reason for that is they are providing funds. They are giving grants. Linde as a company has received several grants from the state of California to build hydrogen fueling stations. Without those grants, the business case isn't really there. It costs a couple $1 million to build one of these fueling stations, and the state of California is giving us a large portion of that money to build these fueling stations. Without that, the business case isn't really there. And so the state of California has made it a point that they are going to be the forerunner in hydrogen. They have lots of money that they are, I don't want to say lots of money, they have money that they are dishing out to companies that are building these facilities in hopes that they'll kind of make a blueprint for how it should be in the future and build up that infrastructure, get more hydrogen cars in the area, and so they're kind of making an investment in us and our competitors to build these stations and hopefully bring that industry to California. So California is kind of the leader in hydrogen just because of the funds and the grants that they're issuing to companies like ours.
Interesting. All right. Well, hopefully New Jersey will kick in some more money towards hydrogen engineering. Has there been any talk of that recently that you know of? Because I'm unaware.
No, not New Jersey. New Jersey's really good with solar power. I think we actually have the most solar panels in any state, which is impressive because I don't think we have that much sun.
Yeah.
But there is some alternative energy push in New Jersey. It's just not necessarily towards hydrogen. So maybe in the coming futures, but we haven't heard anything anytime soon.
All right. Well, do we have any more questions to address?
One more. What is the best way to store the fuel cells between testing? That's a good one. Okay.
Disconnect it.
Yeah. Disconnect it. One thing that my team did is wrapping it in aluminum foil, as air degrades it. And so let's say it's degrading and you're having some issues. I don't know if I take this apart, if the membranes can readily come out. What you can do is if you're having some issues and you're out of fuel cells, take it apart, take the membrane right in there, dip it in water, and then reconstruct it. But in the meantime, keep it out of the air and wrap it in something.
Cellophane wrap, plastic wrap, yeah.
Ziploc bag, anything that'll make sure to keep the atmosphere constant so more air is not flowing over than it needs to.
That's good to know on our end too. We've been putting them in Ziploc bags. Can we put them in all together in one giant Ziploc bag, or is it better to keep them separated somehow, like with some cellophane in between, or what would you suggest?
You get them in one giant bag, you have more air in the bag. That's
I would just wrap them in cellophane wrap.
Right. And then you can put them in the bag.
And then you can put them in the bag.
Yeah.
But you want to have like a tight seal over where the connection is, and so cellophane will adhere to it, and it won't allow that little buffer space that you have in a Ziploc bag. It's not like you're going to inert the bag with nitrogen or anything like that. So I would just think that cellophane wrap, or a plastic bag would be fine. Put them all in one bag, that's fine, I guess. If you have an issue with the bag, though, you just ruined a bunch of fuel cells as opposed to one. So, I don't see an issue with putting them in the Ziploc bag.
Okay, well, I have some questions of my own. I visited some high schools recently in the past few weeks, and I had some questions about the gold pins that go into the fuel cells to connect them properly. If they run out of gold pins or they lose them or whatever happens, what would you suggest as an alternative to those pins?
Copper?
Yeah.
I mean,
That works.
they're using gold. I'm assuming they're gold. I mean, they're painted gold. I find it hard to believe they're
Gold-plated.
mostly gold.
Gold-plated.
Gold
I
plate.
just assumed they were. I just assumed by the color. I don't know necessarily what is involved in their composition.
Yeah, they are. But they're probably using gold just because gold is a fantastic conductor. But copper is an equally as good conductor
And readily available.
and readily available. You can probably find some small gauge wire, copper wire, that you can get the right size. And I would just use copper wire.
Honestly, they sell these things at
Hobby stores.
hobby stores, Lowe's, Home Depot, any construction place will have that has an electrical section will have these, because this is a fairly common thing.
What is it? Conduit? No.
Yeah, I guess.
Okay. And the other question that I have for you is the students have been going in between using balloons or the syringes to collect the gases from their fuel cells. Do you see any advantage one way or the other, or what would you recommend? What are some tests that maybe they could conduct to find out for themselves, if you have any input?
So I would think a syringe is better airtight-wise. A balloon is pretty porous. Everyone knows you put helium in a balloon, and 3 days later the balloon's sitting on the ground. And helium is 2 times as large as hydrogen. So I would recommend a syringe. It's a thicker gauge of plastic. You're probably not going to have as much leakage.
It's designed to prevent leakage.
It's designed to prevent leakage. So, I mean, a balloon would work.
It doesn't stretch.
As long as you're not holding it for days on end, it wouldn't be terrible. But if you're really conscious about your hydrogen loss, the more rigid the plastic, the better.
And then also, what are some really good materials for construction that they can find just around the house that don't really cost a whole lot? What are some of the best recycled materials that you would encourage them to try to incorporate in their designs?
Look at plastics from any beverage or food container. They're usually pretty rigid, and obviously, since you've already used them for food, they don't cost anything. That's the easiest way to do it.
Aluminum, that goes for aluminum as well.
Yeah.
Malleable.
I mean,
yeah,
siding, don't rip off siding from your house, but if you had a spare piece of siding, I mean, thin gauge aluminum, recycled plastic bottles.
PVC piping, if you've got extra around your house, that's really rigid.
Yeah, you can also find that in the hardware store, definitely.
If any of you still have your Connects from when you were a kid, make things real
That's
easy.
good, yeah.
Next.
Legos, those kind of building block toys, you can use those.
We've definitely had students use the gears from the Legos kits and the K'NEX kits before. And that brings me to my gear question for you. What would you recommend for the students to do to test out their gear ratios?
Test them out.
I really wish I could tell you something elegant, but there really isn't. I mean, depending on the chassis and how your fuel cell's working, and 3 versus 4 wheels, big wheels to small wheels, you just gotta. It's brute force will get you the results quicker.
I'm trying to think how they could gauge it then.
Yeah, maybe.
It's a force meter or use a given amount of.
What I've been doing is just putting them on the ground and seeing if they take off, and if they do, hooray, and if they don't, let's go back to the drawing board. So I wasn't sure if you had any insider tricks for ways to test that out.
You need to make sure you have your design of experiment.
I mean, what I would do in terms of friction maybe is remove all the motors and just, I guess, no, you can't. I was going to say run it without power down an incline and see how far it goes just off of gravity power. And doing different gears, you'll see amount of friction. So maybe a small gear, if you drop it down a given height down a ramp, it'll go 6 feet. But if you put a big gear in it and you drop it down that same ramp, maybe it only goes 4 feet. And so that'll tell you some of the friction that's involved with it. So assuming the same ramp length and height and kind of the same potential energy, maybe a certain gear will take you further than some other gear. That doesn't necessarily take into the motor power and how the motor affects the gears, but that'll give you a friction kind of idea of what you're doing.
It'll give you half your answer.
It'll give you half.
I mean, you can also look at as far as gear ratios, the more gears that you have on, the more friction you're going to have and less efficient you're going to be. You'll have to do kind of trial and error to figure out what the optimum gear ratio as well as how many gears you're going to have in order to get what's going to be successful for you.
All right, excellent. So that was all the questions that were submitted. I don't see any questions as of right now. So I was just wondering if you could all give your parting advice to our students before the big race day. As we know, it's fast approaching, December 17th. I think we have a judge coming from Lindy to be there. So if you could just give us a couple of words of advice for our participants, that'd be excellent.
Make the car as light as possible, least amount of friction as possible, and I'm trying to think what else.
Really came down to was testing and practice. You can spend all day long like, oh, we need a whole new design. We're going to need to reduce the weight. When it comes to crunch time, you're going to be, you're inclined to make a drastic change. It's much more fruitful to refine through good design of experiment and testing.
Most importantly, break the opponent's car.
Sabotage.
Just kidding. Don't do that. That's a bad idea.
Just practice with your car. Do the research on your car. Try all the gears that are given. Try different wheel configurations if you can. Make a car that's kind of flexible that you're able to mix and match with. It's still stable, and figure out kind of what config you want. And you want to do that as easily as possible. So yeah, just kind of play with some configurations. Maybe make a car that doesn't necessarily have the huge structure and all the elaborate bells and whistles, and it's just a chassis and a frame, and figure out what wheel configuration works best for you, what gear ratio works best for you. And then once you figure that out, then kind of work on all the aesthetics of the car. So don't focus too much on the aesthetics right now. Figure out what's for you in terms of the mechanics. And then once you have that, then focus on the body. So that would be my advice.
And when you're in your design phase, just remember, no idea is a bad idea. Just make sure you're taking notes so you don't do the same test 3 or 4 times, and you're getting the same result. You know you got the right result, but you do things over again. Take notes, make sure you're doing things different, getting different results, and just track the results. See if there's a trend that you can pick up on.
Yeah.
Excellent, and they should be taking notes the whole time. As they said, it's part of their progress journal, and you guys as the judges will end up having to judge their progress journal. So given that, do you have any recommendations for the best way to take good notes aside from hard copy? Are there any like electronic apps that you've found very useful, or any suggestions?
Yeah, I would just use Excel for everything.
If you have numbers, Excel is the way to do it. Absolutely.
Excel, and yeah, I would say Excel is probably the best, because even if you're going to write, you can plot things. If you need to plot your time trials or something like that, you can see the trends in front of you. So if you do a bunch of races and you're doing a bunch of practice and you're trying to see how far you go on a given amount of hydrogen, you can plot that and see kind of what's working for you. And it's easier than just reading your notes and saying, okay, we went this far with this time and that far that time. But if you have a plot in front of you and you're able to see, it just makes it so much easier. Just all to one platform. Just make a big Excel file with a bunch of sheets. Maybe you have writing on one sheet and time trials on another sheet. And I would just keep it to one kind of app or one software package to make it all easier.
Yeah, because they don't need mathematics.
Yeah. So that would be my recommendation. In terms of apps, taking notes, I just take notes on a piece of paper, so that's all I have. So I don't really have any of the app knowledge for note taking.
Yeah, I rely on the good old pen and paper myself. So that is all the questions that we have so far. That's all my questions. I don't know if you all have questions for us here at Transoptions or open-ended questions that you want to present in this video towards the students. If you do, now's the time, and if not, we can wrap it up.
I think we're ready to wrap up. You okay? Yeah. We're okay. We're good.
Okay, well, I just want to extend my gratitude to you, Lindy Engineers, for taking your time out of your day to make this video with us for our student participants. And we look forward to seeing you December 17th for our big race day, if you can hopefully make it. And if not, we'll be taking plenty of video for you to see what the students incorporated from this video from your advice. So once again, thank you very much from everyone here at Transoptions. I hope you have a great Thanksgiving.
You too.
You too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.